Welcome to the deep dive. We try to cut through the noise, bring you the essential insights on some complex
Get
topics.
right to the heart of things.
Exactly. And today we're taking a deep dive into the, well, truly extraordinary reign of King Bhumibol Adulyadej.
Also known as King Rama X of Thailand.
Right, Ramnan X. And, for many of you listening, maybe especially the younger generation, his story,
hmm
his remarkable life, his vision, his dedication over 70 years shaping Thailand, it might be a bit of a new story.
It's a huge part of modern Thai history.
It really is. So our goal today is to help you understand the immense challenges he faced and the profound legacy he left behind.
It's genuinely fascinating when you think about it because, the 20th century monarchies globally were often fading out or losing
And
power.
becoming more symbolic.
Exactly. But the Thai monarchy under Rama X, it didn't just endure. It actually remained this strong, unifying force.
So how did that happen?
Well, we'll explore how his reign started amidst incredible political turmoil, really difficult circumstances,
Mm.
and how he managed to build such enduring strength and connection with the Thai people.
So, what does this all mean for Thailand? How did a monarch who could have just been symbolic become so integral?
That's the core question, isn't it?
Yeah. We're going to trace his journey, from deep uncertainty right at the start to an era of widespread development. Try and review the choices, the philosophies that defined his really remarkable time on the throne.
Okay, let's dive in.
So let's unpack this right from the beginning. His ascension, King Rama X's rise to the throne, it wasn't easy at all.
No, not by any means.
You have to remember, just over a decade before he became king, Siam, as Thailand was called, then had the 1932 revolution.
Right, 2475 in the Buddhist era. That ended the absolute monarchy.
Completely changed the game. The king went from being an absolute ruler to, well, a head of state mostly stripped of political power.
That's right. And this whole situation led King Rama VII to actually abdicate. He ended up living abroad.
And his successor?
His successor, King Ananda Mahidol, Rama VIII, he was only 12 when he took the throne.
Just a boy, really.
Yeah. And he only reigned for about a decade before his tragic death, a gunshot wound at Barafamen Palace in 1946.
2489 BE. And that event itself, highly controversial, widely believed to be an assassination.
Absolutely. And that's the backdrop. This incredibly volatile environment, unanswered questions about Rama VIII's death, conspiracy theories flying around.
Right, even implicating the prime minister at the time, Preeti Bhanamyone.
It was into that chaotic situation that Prince Bhumibol Adulyadej immediately succeeded his brother in 1946.
An incredibly difficult start, political chaos.
And it didn't stop there. The instability just kept rolling. A year later, 1947.
Another two.
Exactly. A military coup led by Field Marshal Finn Schoonhaven. And part of the justification, or at least the cited reason, was the unresolved death of King Rama VIII and all the political conflict.
So more turmoil.
More turmoil. And this brought Field Marshal P. Pibulsongkram back into power as prime minister.
And he wasn't exactly a royalist, was he?
No, not really. He was more of a nationalist figure and actively tried to diminish the king's authority, passed laws to curtail his power. He really tried to project himself as the supreme leader.
So for the young King Rama X, just starting out, his powers were significantly limited, a really tough position.
Incredibly difficult early years.
So given that tumultuous start, how did things begin to change? How did the monarchy regain its footing, its influence?
Well, a really critical turning point, according to the sources, seems to be 1957.
Okay, what happened then?
Another coup, this time led by Field Marshal Sarit Thanaraat, who overthrew Pabulsongkram.
Right.
And crucially, Sarit made the decision to restore King Rama X's royal powers, the powers that had been, chipped away.
That's a huge shift. Why would Sarah do that?
Well, if you connect it to the bigger global picture,
Yeah.
the context is key here.
The Cold War.
Exactly. The Cold War was really heating up. The U.S. had emerged from World War II as this dominant, liberal, anti-communist power.
And communism was spreading nearby.
Right. Vietnam, Laos, they were already in conflict. China had gone communist. It was seen as a major threat in Southeast Asia.
So Thailand was strategically important.
Very. And the U.S. perspective shifted. Instead of maybe seeing the monarchy as, outdated, they saw it as a vital institution.
A bulwark against communism.
Precisely. The thinking was, if the monarchy remained strong, a symbol of national unity, then the Thai people wouldn't be drawn to communist ideologies.
Okay, so Sarit, restoring the king's powers fits into that larger strategy.
It seems likely, yeah. It bolstered a key anti-communist symbol.
So then the question becomes, how does the king, now with restored powers, projects that strength, especially after years of being sidelined?
Good question. And what we see is, starting around 1960, he begins these significant international visits.
Ah, diplomacy.
Yes. He met Queen Elizabeth II in the UK, a powerful image, monarchy to monarchy. And very importantly, he traveled to the U.S., met President Nixon, met Defense Secretary Robert McNamara.
Key figures in the Cold War context.
Absolutely. These trips weren't just about photo ops or standard diplomacy. They were about strengthening ties, yes, but also subtly signaling the monarchy's renewed strength.
Signaling to who?
To communist forces in the region, perhaps. And also elevating Thailand's role internationally, showing it had a strong, stable center.
And the U.S. backing became concrete, right, in terms of aid?
Oh, definitely. The financial support was substantial. We're talking about figures like $76 million in 1962.
Wow.
Then $108 million in 1966. And by 1969, $192 million.
That's serious money, especially back then.
It really is. If you adjust for inflation, that's somewhere in the realm of 50 to 60 billion Thai baht today. It was a massive investment.
So this U.S. support, the financial backing, the strategic alignment, it fundamentally changed the monarchy's position.
You could argue that, yeah. The Cold War, ironically, gave King Rama the external backing and resources to rebuild internal authority. He became this pivotal anti-communist figure.
But that kind of close relationship with the U.S., that influx of money and influence, it must have had other effects, too.
It did. It wasn't just political or economic. It brought a wave of liberal Western culture.
Like what?
Music, movies, fashion, the whole hippie movement started to ripple outwards. And this new thinking, these different perspectives, they began to influence Thai society.
Especially intellectuals, students.
Exactly. Intellectuals, students, academics. They started to absorb these ideas and inevitably began to question Thailand's own long-standing military dictatorship.
So the anti-communist alignment inadvertently fueled internal dissent against the military regime.
It's one way to look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
These influences created a new dynamic, and we see this manifest in events like the student protests on October 14th, 1973.
Right, 2516 BE. What happened there?
Well, the details are complex, but the military claimed students had illegally entered the palace grounds. This event, sadly, seems to have started creating a bit of a distance, maybe some tension, between the king and parts of the public, particularly the student movement.
And things escalated further, didn't they?
Tragically, yes. The incident on October 6, 1976, 519 BE, students protesting at Thammasat University were surrounded,
And attacked
and killed. The military and right-wing groups accused them of being communists, of defaming the king. It was brutal.
A terrible event. And how did the king react to this violence, this division?
It seems this period, these violent crackdowns, made it clear to King Rama that the military's approach wasn't working. It was actually widening the gap between the monarchy and the people, pushing people away.
So if force isn't the answer.
Right. How do you counter an ideology like communism if your methods are just creating more division, more resentment?
A fundamental challenge.
And by around 1980, with General Prem Tinsulananda as prime minister, King Rama articulated a really different perspective, a profound shift.
What was his view?
He essentially said that the people involved with the communist movement weren't inherently enemies or, ideologically evil. He saw them more as, well, his words were something like just hungry Thais.
Hungry ties.
Yeah. People lacking the opportunities and comforts found in the cities.
Yeah.
His philosophy became, and this is a quote attributed to him, "We are not fighting against people. We are fighting against hunger. We want to have them have a better life, so everybody happy."
Wow. That's a completely different framing. Not military, but developmental. Human.
Exactly. Fighting poverty, not people. And this became the foundation of a new strategy, a much softer approach.
So how did they implement this?
Well, they gathered data, found out where the communist support bases and camps mostly were.
And where were they?
Predominantly in remote, often underdeveloped border areas. Places like Phetchabun, Phayao, Chiang Rai, Nan, Loei, many others across the country. Difficult places to live.
Makes sense. People with fewer opportunities might be more receptive to alternative ideas.
Precisely. So the king directed efforts to develop those specific regions directly.
Through government channels.
Partly government, but also significantly through his own initiatives. His personal staff, medical associations linked to the royals, the Thai Red Cross, the Royal Household Bureau itself, they focused on economic improvement, solving local problems, bringing resources directly to these areas.
A very hands-on approach from the monarchy.
Extremely hands-on. And this direct intervention, combined with government development efforts, led to a really noticeable decline in the communist movement within just a few years.
That's remarkable.
It really solidified the view, especially among conservatives, that the Thai monarchy could hold the people's loyalty, could win hearts and minds in a way that force couldn't. It countered the idea that communism was inevitable.
By addressing the root causes, hunger, lack of opportunity.
Exactly, a strategic masterstroke in many ways.
So from about 1982 onwards, with the communist threat largely diminished, what was the focus?
The focus really deepened on these royal development initiatives, and the scale is just astonishing.
How many are we talking about?
Our sources point to around 5,000 projects nationwide over the years.
5,000.
Roughly, yes. Think about that. Over 3,200 related to water resources, dams, reservoirs, irrigation, about 170 agricultural projects, over 180 environmental projects.
Just a massive undertaking aimed directly at people's basic needs.
Absolutely. Water management, for example. Things like the Waimong Reservoir project you mentioned, turning arid land into fertile ground. That directly impacts farmers, communities, livelihoods.
Then this must have built enormous goodwill.
Immense love and faith is how it's often described. This period, roughly 1982 up to the late 90s, saw this unprecedented closeness between the monarchy and the public. People saw the king actively working for them.
And this coincided with an economic boom too, right?
It did. Significant Japanese investment flowed in, creating factories, jobs. It was a prosperous time for many Thai workers. The middle class grew. Thailand was almost dubbed the fifth Asian tiger economically.
Almost. Until
the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The Tommy-Yung-Kung crisis, as it's known in Thailand. That hit hard.
Right. But going back to the king's role, it wasn't just development projects. He also intervened in political crises.
Yes, quite directly at times. The most famous example is probably May 1992.
Black May.
Black May, yes. General Suchinda Kreprayun had staged a coup, became prime minister unelected, and when protests erupted, he ordered troops to fire on them.
A very tense, dangerous moment.
Extremely. And King Rama intervened directly. He summoned both Suchinda, the military leader, and Major General Chamlong Srimwan, the protest leader, to the palace.
And the images are famous. Them kneeling before him.
Exactly. He essentially instructed Suchinda to resign and Chamlong to disperse the crowds, to stop the bloodshed.
A powerful display of moral authority, acting as the ultimate arbiter.
A unifying figure above the political conflict. It cemented that image for many.
And even later, with more political instability, like the protests in 2006 or 2010.
Even amidst that ongoing turmoil, sources suggest King Rama X continued his focus on the welfare of the people through his projects. Irrigation, the Monkey Cheek, water retention areas, Kainling to manage floods.
The Royal Rainmaking Project.
Yes, his pioneering cloud seeding work.
Yeah.
And promoting his sufficiency economy philosophy.
Which is about
Moderation, prudence, self-reliance, resilience. Not chasing maximum growth at all costs, but building a more sustainable, balanced economy and society.
interesting. Given this immense influence and reverence, how did the king himself view criticism? Or things like the Lèse Majesté Law, Article 112, which protects the monarchy? That's always a sensitive topic.
It is. But what's quite remarkable, according to the information we have, is how open he seemed to be, at least in his stated views.
Really?
Yes. There's a well-known quote attributed to him saying, "In reality, the king is not always right and can be criticized."
That's quite something for a monarch to say.
It is. He also apparently observed that Article 112, the Lèse Majesté Law, when used supposedly to protect him, often ended up harming him,
How so?
but making him look like a dictator, essentially. He seemed to suggest it was often the government or military using the law, not necessarily him driving it personally.
Is there evidence of him acting on that belief?
Well, there's a powerful anecdote mentioned in our sources about a person who was imprisoned under Article 112 for a book they wrote.
Okay.
The story goes that the king actually intervened, directly ordered the prosecutor to drop the case, and the person was released.
Wow.
It suggests he saw that such arrests, such use of the law, wasn't actually beneficial. Perhaps he understood that strong criticism wasn't always an insult, maybe sometimes a warning, or just a different perspective.
That shows a certain pragmatism. Or maybe a deeper understanding of how true loyalty is fostered.
Perhaps both. It reveals a nuance, doesn't it? A focus on the overall welfare and stability, maybe even above personal veneration or strict legal enforcement in some cases.
And his work continued beyond these high-profile interventions, right?
Yeah.
Granting citizenship, water projects.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Granting Thai nationality to people in remote hill tribes who often lacked citizenship. Continuous work on water development, especially in arid regions, which was crucial for agriculture. Keeping Thai rice as a top global export.
Education, healthcare.
Expanding access to education and medical aid, particularly for the poor. All contributing to human resource development. Helping reduce farmer debt, especially from the 2000s onwards. It's a vast portfolio of work.
So when you look back at the entire reign, nearly 70 years.
Which ended with his passing in 2016 after being treated at Siraj Hospital. It's a reign marked by just unwavering dedication.
He was often described almost like a deity by many Thais, wasn't he?
Yes, the comparison was often made. Seen as someone who poured his entire effort, his sweat, into working for his people tirelessly.
His life story really is quite incredible, especially when you consider there's immense challenges right at the start. The political chaos, the limited power, and then contrast that with the deeply personal, adaptive approach he took to governance, to development. It really does embody that idea of a monarch working tirelessly for the nation. A powerful example.
It really does. And it leaves us with something important to think about, doesn't it? For you, listening. In today's world, with constant change, so much information, how does any leader, even one in a more symbolic role, cultivate that kind of deep-seated trust, that affection from the people, sustained over 7 decades?
That's a deep question. What are the principles behind that kind of lasting influence?
Something to ponder?
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the truly extraordinary legacy of King Rama Knights.
Our pleasure.
We hope this has given you, especially perhaps if his story was new to you, a richer understanding of his dedication and the enduring impact of his very long reign.